FM News Talk 97.1. On demand audio.
Well, I found out that these individuals are very tough. They're battle-hardened. They're very dedicated. They are not Al-Qaeda. They're not extremists. I met with some 19 battalion commanders, both in Turkey and in Syria, but they're badly outgunned now. And there's a lot of really serious stuff going on that just breaks your heart.
It is sad. Does it require the intervention of the United States? Not that I see. Not that I see at all. On this topic and several other ones, Stephen Yates is foreign policy expert with the D.C. International Advisory, also former advisor to former VP Dick Cheney. And Stephen, just to let you know, if a certain buzzword today comes up, we have to go all Pee-wee's Playhouse on it. So don't be scared. Thanks so much for joining me.
Thanks for having me.
This John McCain going across the border to meet with Syrian rebels. This is was this sort of like some sort of goodwill publicity campaign for him to try to drum up some sort of support for further U.S. involvement?
I think the short answer to that is yes, but I have some sympathy for some of the arguments that he's making. I mean, General Jack Keane, I think, is a very sound and reasonable guy, and he's dealt a lot with these forces over there. And he comes to some similar conclusions in terms of not everyone is Al-Qaeda in that fight. Of course, that's going to be a true statement. Doesn't mean that there aren't people to watch out for. But, you know, the fundamental question you asked is, does it get to the point of U.S. intervention? And I think that we just haven't really done all we could. That's the middle ground before a U.S.-owned and operated, the old Pottery Barn example of you break it, you own it. There's a lot of things between going all in with us in the lead and sitting and doing what the Obama administration doing, which is sort of whistling past the graveyard as Hezbollah changes the battleground there.
Yeah, and that's a lot coming up because now there's a lot of Hezbollah fighters involved in Syria, gathering around one of the main cities there in Syria. This is, you just never, I just feel like it's sort of like a situation as it was with Libya. You're not quite sure exactly who you were assisting. We're not really exactly sure who the rebels are in Syria. And I just don't see any immediate threat to any interest in the United States whatsoever. I fear that this would lead us into a path where we're in conflict with Russia or something. It just seems that it would destabilize it further if we were to get involved.
Well, there's a risk of that, but there's a risk of inaction too. I mean, there's always a risk that any given day a missile is launched out of Syria that lands in Israel, and that opens a whole set of questions that we would rather not have to answer right now. There's also the issue of the refugee flows, which we're not really up for humanitarian intervention these days, but the refugee flows into the state of Jordan are profound as a proportion of their population. That state could fail at some point, and that would have consequences for Israel and the broader stability in the Middle East. And then you see this arc of Shia activism coming out of Tehran, including actually some elements of the government of Iraq, which we sacrificed to liberate, and then going through Syria and connecting to Hezbollah. I mean, there really is a coalescing secular army across the Middle East that I think is troubling.
Yeah, and also troubling as well. You know, you mentioned the rockets from Syria, and it could possibly land in Israel. And then, of course, there's the news report of Russia sending arms to Syrian rebels, and Israel saying, "Look, this may pose a threat to us, especially with Hezbollah being involved." How serious is the situation right now between Israel and Russia?
I think it's very serious. The Russians. It'll come as a shock to everyone to find out that they play a very cynical and duplicitous game, that they demand that we withdraw missile defenses so that they can threaten their near abroad with missiles. They demand that we not arm the rebels. We have our own issues with that. But their justification is, well, it would lead to international intervention. Oh, like your sales to Syria, Iran sales to Syria, Hezbollah involvement is not internationalization of this problem. So I think they're a major problem. Israel alone can't push them back, and for heaven's sake, John Kerry is not going to help on that.
No. Do you think that they would make good on any, because they've said that a possible attack on that shipment or any other shipments is a possibility. What would that draw Russia into direct conflict with Israel? Because I cannot see Russia not responding.
I mean, I think it really comes down to a balance sheet exercise for the Russians. If they've received payment, I don't think they care if it gets blown up. But if it, and I would strongly suspect that the Israelis, if they see these kinds of equipment appear in Syria, just like they have tactically, whether it was the nuclear site that they took out with North Korean involvement or that last defense depot that they took out, they will surgically eliminate the threats they see before they become ever present to them.
Yeah. Switching it up a little bit to focus on another area that seems troubling, all of the riots that have been taking place in Turkey. Would you classify this as an Arab Spring in Turkey?
I think we have a hard time saying what the Arab Spring was, is, and where it's going. It's definitely an area where you have a government that is concentrating a lot of power among a small group of people, that the population is discontent, and they're hitting the streets. But it's a large country with a large population. It's a little bit hard to say whether these protesters represent a critical mass of Turkish population. It does look through television cameras a lot like what the early protests in Egypt looked like, but we're a long way from those protests leading to a change in government as it did in Egypt.
Right, and Turkey's a predominantly secular country. Is there a chance that something could happen in Turkey? Like while Egypt wasn't, I don't think, as secular as Turkey, Turkey's been, it's a predominantly secular country. And is there a chance that, if I realize I'm asking you to look into a crystal ball, these riots continue and grow into something as what we saw in Egypt, does there exist a possibility of that secular government going away and being replaced by something incredibly Sharia friendly?
There's always that risk, and there was sort of a social compact made under very different circumstances a long time ago that set Turkey on this secular path. But really, Prime Minister Erdogan, ironically, is criticized by many as being an Islamist, cloaking himself in the form of democracy in order to advance his cause. So it would be an unusual twist to have an Islamist sympathetic, democratically elected leader run from office to try to put someone more Islamist in place. But it could happen. I think that basically what you've had, though, is Erdogan trying to establish a Putin-like dynasty in Turkey that is friendly to Islamist causes, but keeps him in power. It's a cult of personality more than religion.
Yeah, that's a really good point, too. Last quick question I have for you. We've heard al-Qaeda leaders say there's going to be more Bostons. Their favorite threat is to say that our streets will run red with blood. We've seen attacks a little bit different than what we've seen previously from terrorists. We saw the beheading of the soldier in London. Of course, the Boston bombings. Another soldier was stabbed in the neck in Paris. Do you think that this is an organized tactical effort? Or do you think that these are perhaps related somehow? Are these independent incidents? And is this what we have to look forward to and perhaps a new development in the war on terror?
I think it is a new wave in the war on terror. Unfortunately, these are very effective. I mean, I consider myself terrorized by the idea that you have to keep an eye out when you go to major public events, that these random killings, sort of like the D.C. sniper situation post 9/11. And it really pinned down the entire Washington metro area in a way that 9/11 itself didn't quite do so.
Yeah.
People got the idea that the Pentagon or a big place could be attacked, but random public events is terrifying. And we have to come up with new tools, and we're going to probably have to fortify ourselves against. We can't tell if they're lying and bragging or whether they mean it.
Right. Well, it's a great time to disarm everybody, Stephen. Great. We
Exactly.
couldn't have picked a better time, I tell you what. Stephen Yates, D.C. International Advisory, DCIadvisory.org. Stephen, we always appreciate your expert opinion. Thank you so much, sir.
Thank you. Happy to dodge the buzzword.
Yeah, you didn't get it. You didn't. There's still next week. Take care.
All right. Bye.
Bye.